The organ swelled through the cathedral like a living thing, filling every corner with sound, so heavy Seren could feel it, pressing against her chest. The music vibrated through the stone floor beneath her satin slippers, traveled up through her bones, and settled somewhere behind her ribs, where her heart was beating far too quickly. Her fingers trembled beneath the weight of white roses and trailing ivy. The bouquet clutched so tightly that the stems bit into her palms through her silk gloves. She could smell the flowers, sweet and heavy, mingling with the beeswax of countless candles and the ancient mustiness of the cathedral itself. Incense lingered beneath it all, a ghost of countless ceremonies that had come before. She kept her eyes fixed on the altar ahead, on the golden candelabras and the stained glass saints watching from above, their painted faces serene and judgmental in equal measure. The afternoon light filtered through the colored glass, casting pools of crimson and sapphire across the marble floor. She focused on those colors, counting them, naming them, anything to avoid acknowledging the 300 witnesses assembled in the pews behind her. 300 people. 300 members of society who had come to watch the Wyndham girl marry above her station. 300 pairs of eyes that would dissect every detail of this day and find her wanting. Her mother sat in the front pew, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief in what Seren recognized as performative joy. The tears were real enough, but they were tears of relief rather than sentiment. Her father had walked her down the aisle with a hand that shook from the same relief, his grip on her arm almost desperate, as though he feared she might bolt at the last moment and take his salvation with her. The Ashworth fortune would cover their debts. The Ashworth name would restore their standing. All Seren had to do was marry a man she did not love. Aldrich Ashworth, the elder son. Handsome enough when he bothered to smile, charming when it served his purposes, utterly indifferent to her existence beyond her usefulness to his family's need for respectable connections. She had accepted his proposal 6 months ago in the drawing room of Ashworth Manor, standing before the fireplace, while rain lashed the windows and Aldrich recited the terms of their arrangement with the enthusiasm of a man ordering new boots. She remembered every detail of that day, the smell of wood smoke and old books, the portrait of the late Duke watching from above the mantel, his painted eyes stern and knowing. And in the doorway, half hidden by shadows, Aldrich's younger brother had stood watching with an expression she couldn't read and had never forgotten. He had said nothing, done nothing, merely observed with those dark, unfathomable eyes before disappearing as silently as he had appeared. His younger brother. Serene's heart clenched at the thought, as it always did. She forced herself to breathe, to focus on the altar, on the vicar waiting with his prayer book, on anything except the man who haunted her dreams and had no right to be there. Corvin Ashworth, the Duke of Ashworth, since his father's sudden death 2 years past. The man whose dark eyes had found hers across ballrooms and dinner tables throughout her engagement, always watching from a careful distance, never speaking beyond what courtesy demanded, carrying secrets she desperately wanted to understand. This was her duty, her sacrifice, her family's only hope. The feelings she harbored for the wrong Ashworth brother were irrelevant. They had always been irrelevant. The music shifted, the tempo changing to signal the groom's approach. The congregation rustled, silk and satin whispering as 300 heads turned toward the side entrance. Serene heard footsteps on marble, measured and deliberate, growing closer with each beat of her racing heart. She didn't turn. Brides weren't supposed to turn. They were supposed to wait, serene and patient, while their futures walked toward them. So she waited, her pulse racing beneath her stays, her breath coming too shallow as the footsteps grew closer and finally stopped. He was beside her now. She could feel the warmth of another body, could sense the presence of the man who would be her husband, In minutes. Something was wrong. She knew it before she understood how she knew it. A wrongness in the air itself, in the quality of the silence that had fallen over the cathedral. The height wasn't quite right. Her intended stood half a head taller than this figure beside her. The presence wasn't quite right either. Aldrich carried himself with casual arrogance, loose-limbed and indifferent. This man stood rigid as a soldier, tension radiating from every line of his body. And the scent, the familiar smell of bergamot and tobacco that always accompanied Aldrich, was absent. In its place, she detected something entirely different. Cedar and ink and something almost wild, like storms over open moors. Her stomach dropped. Seren turned her head. The world stopped spinning on its axis. It was not Aldrich standing beside her at the altar. It was Corvin. Corvin Ashworth, the Duke, the man she had spent 6 months carefully not thinking about, the man whose mere presence made her forget how to form coherent sentences, the man who was absolutely, categorically, impossibly not supposed to be standing where his brother should be. He was looking at her now, with those eyes she had tried so hard to forget. Dark as midnight, steady as stone, holding depths she couldn't begin to fathom. His jaw was set in that sharp line she had memorized against her will, and his dark hair was swept back from a face that made her chest ache with wanting things she couldn't have. The cathedral erupted. Gasps rippled through the pews like wind through wheat. Whispers exploded into open exclamations. She heard her mother's strangled cry, her father's confused demand for explanation. The vicar stood frozen at the altar, his prayer book hanging limply in his hands, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Seren couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely draw breath into lungs that had forgotten their purpose. Where, she managed, her voice emerging as a cracked whisper that surely didn't carry past the first row. Is Aldrich? Corvin's jaw flexed. A muscle leaped beneath the sharp line of his cheekbone. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear, intimate and urgent in the chaos around them. Gone. He left a letter last night. He's not coming. The words crashed through her like ice water poured down her spine. Gone. After 6 months of engagement, after 3 months of wedding preparations, after her family had announced to everyone they knew that their daughter would be marrying into the Ashworth fortune, after she had steeled herself to endure a loveless marriage for the sake of duty. Gone. I don't understand. Her fingers had gone numb around the bouquet. The roses seemed impossibly heavy now, dragging at her hands. Why are you? Because someone must. His eyes never left hers, dark and intense and utterly unreadable. Because your family's reputation will be destroyed if no Ashworth stands at this altar today. Because every door in society will close to your family if you walk out of this cathedral unmarried. Because my brother is a coward who would let you face that humiliation alone, and I am not. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they cut like knives. Duty, obligation, protection of her family's reputation. Nothing about her. Nothing about wanting to be here. Just another Ashworth cleaning up another mess. You can't simply substitute yourself for a groom. Her voice found some strength, rising despite the chaos around them. This isn't a country dance where partners are interchangeable. This is a marriage. I'm aware of what it is. Corvin's hand moved to cover hers where they clutched the roses. His touch was warm through the silk of her gloves, steady and sure where she was trembling. I'm also aware that if you walk out of this cathedral without a ring on your finger, your father's creditors will descend before nightfall. Every door in society will slam shut. Your younger sister's prospects will be ruined before she ever has a season. I received Aldrich's letter at midnight and spent 5 hours with solicitors confirming the marriage contract allows for substitution with family consent. He had prepared for this. He had spent the entire night preparing to take his brother's place. The realization made her head spin. Why do you care? Something flickered through those dark eyes. Pain, perhaps. Or longing. Or something she was afraid to name. It vanished before she could be certain, replaced by careful neutrality. Do you need a reason beyond basic decency? The vicar stepped forward nervously, his face pale and damp with anxious perspiration. Your Grace, Miss Wyndham, the congregation is becoming quite disturbed. If we might proceed, or alternatively retire to discuss. We proceed. Corvin's voice carried the authority of a man born to command. He looked at Seren, and something in his gaze softened almost imperceptibly. If the lady agrees. Every rational thought in Seren's mind screamed at her to refuse. This was not what she had prepared for. This was not the careful, loveless arrangement she had steeled herself to endure. This was Corvin, the man whose mere presence made her heart race and her thoughts scatter like startled birds. The man she had spent 6 months avoiding precisely because being near him was unbearable. Marrying him would be torture of an entirely different kind. Not the dull ache of indifference she had expected with Aldrich. This would be the sharp, constant pain of wanting something she could never truly have. Of sharing a name with a man who saw her only as an obligation. But her father's debts pressed heavy on her shoulders. Her mother's desperate hopes weighted her conscience. Her sister Maren, only 15, deserving of a future that didn't include disgrace and poverty. And beneath all of that, buried so deep she barely acknowledged its existence, was a terrible, treacherous hope. Seren looked into Corvin's eyes, those dark, unfathomable depths that had haunted her for 2 long years, and made the only choice she could. I agree. The vicar exhaled with visible relief and opened his prayer book. The whispers behind them reached a fever pitch, and then, slowly, grudgingly, began to quiet as the congregation realized the ceremony would continue. Corvin's hand pressed against hers once more, warm and steady, and Seren wondered if she had just saved her family or damned herself entirely. The carriage ride to Ashworth Manor passed in suffocating silence. Seren sat on one side of the velvet-upholstered bench, her wedding gown pooling around her like a silk ocean, the heavy fabric suddenly unbearable against her skin. Her hands lay folded in her lap with rigid propriety, her new wedding ring glinting whenever light caught it through the carriage windows. The gold felt foreign on her finger, a weight she hadn't earned. Corvin sat across from her, his long legs stretched at an angle to avoid crushing her skirts, his gaze fixed on the passing countryside, as though the rolling hills of the Ashworth estate held answers to questions he couldn't voice. His profile was sharp against the window's light, all clean lines and controlled tension. She studied him when she thought he wasn't looking, memorizing the way afternoon sunlight caught the angles of his face. He had barely spoken since they'd left the cathedral. A few terse instructions to the footman, a curt nod to the gathered well-wishers who'd lined the church steps, their faces frozen in expressions that ranged from shocked to delighted to deeply suspicious. A single glance at his sister Cosima, who had been weeping so hard her face was blotchy, though whether from joy or distress, Seren still couldn't determine. The carriage swayed gently as they turned onto the estate road. Outside, ancient oaks lined the drive, their branches creating a canopy of green that filtered the afternoon sunlight into golden coins scattered across the carriage interior. Birds sang in the distance, oblivious to the turmoil of human hearts. The reality of what she'd done began to settle over her like a physical weight. She was married. To Corvin Ashworth, the Duke of Ashworth. She was a duchess. The title felt absurd, like a costume she'd stolen from someone else's wardrobe. Duchesses were grand and imposing, women who commanded rooms and intimidated servants, and wore family jewels with effortless authority. Duchesses were born to silk cradles and raised knowing exactly which fork to use and how to address foreign dignitaries. They didn't lie awake at night, calculating whether their families could afford coal for the winter. Seren was the daughter of a baronet who'd gambled away 3 generations of wealth and left his family scrambling for respectability. She had learned proper deportment not from governesses, but from etiquette books, borrowed from lending libraries. She had practiced her curtsy before a cracked mirror in a room where the wallpaper was peeling. "You'll need to meet with the housekeeper tomorrow." Corvin's voice shattered the silence. She looked up to find him watching her now, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Blackstone has managed the household for 20 years. She'll walk you through the domestic arrangements, staff schedules, menus, household accounts, that sort of thing. She's efficient and not unkind once she warms to someone." "I see." Serene's voice came out steadier than she felt. "And what exactly are my duties, Your Grace?" Discomfort crossed his features at the formal address. "Corvin, we're married now. Formality seems rather absurd given the circumstances." "Very well, Corvin." His name tasted strange on her tongue, forbidden almost. She'd spent so long carefully not saying it, not even in the privacy of her own thoughts. "What are my duties?" "The same as any duchess. Manage the household, attend social functions, represent the family with dignity." He paused, his jaw working briefly before he continued. "Beyond that, I'll make no demands on you. Your chambers will be separate from mine. Your time will be your own. This arrangement need not be burdensome for either of us. Separate chambers, her time her own." He was drawing lines already, building fortifications between them before they'd even arrived at their destination, making clear the boundaries of this arrangement. Seren should have felt relieved. This was precisely what she'd expected from Aldrich after all. A marriage of convenience, nothing more. 2 people sharing a name while living separate lives. Instead, something ached beneath her ribs, something that felt dangerously like disappointment. "And Aldrich?" She forced herself to ask the question that had been burning in her throat since the cathedral. What did his letter say? Where has he gone? Corvin's expression closed like a door slamming shut. His hands clenched briefly against his thighs before he forced them to relax. "That's not your concern." "I was supposed to marry him. I think it rather is my concern." "You were supposed to marry him. Now you're married to me. His whereabouts and motivations are irrelevant." Silence stretched between them, taut as a wire pulled to its breaking point. Outside, the carriage crested a hill, and Ashworth Manor came into view. Serene's breath caught in her throat. She had visited the estate twice during her engagement to Aldrich, brief afternoon calls that had been carefully chaperoned and deliberately short. But she had never seen it like this, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, its pale stone walls glowing like something from a fairy tale. The manor sprawled across the landscape with the casual grandeur of old money, its wings stretching outward to embrace manicured gardens and ancient oaks. Fountains glittered in the distance, their spray catching the sunlight and scattering it into rainbows. Peacocks wandered the lawns with absurd dignity, their tail feathers dragging behind them like royal trains. This was her home now. This impossible, magnificent place. "It's overwhelming at first," Corvin said quietly, and she realized she must have made some sound of astonishment. "The scale of it, the expectations. But you'll adjust. Everyone does eventually." She wanted to laugh at the understatement. Instead, she nodded, her throat too constricted for words. The carriage rolled through iron gates topped with the Ashworth crest and down a long gravel drive lined with lime trees. Servants had already assembled on the front steps, a small army in black and white, standing at attention as though awaiting a general's inspection. Corvin stepped out first into the golden light, then turned to offer his hand. Seren took it, acutely aware of how her fingers trembled against his palm, how small her hand looked in his. She descended from the carriage on legs that felt like water, her wedding dress suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds. "Your Grace." An older woman in severe black stepped forward from the assembled servants, her iron-gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features into permanent disapproval. "Welcome to Ashworth Manor. I am Mrs. Blackstone. The household is at your disposal." "Thank you." Serene's voice sounded foreign to her own ears, too thin, too uncertain, not the voice of a duchess at all. She followed Mrs. Blackstone through doors that seemed impossibly tall, into an entrance hall that could have swallowed her family's entire house 3 times over. Marble floors stretched in every direction, veined with gold and reflecting the light from crystal chandeliers. A staircase swept upward in a graceful curve, its banister gleaming with centuries of polish. Portraits of Ashworth ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her progress with what felt like judgment. Men in armor, women in elaborate gowns, generations of breeding and privilege, all staring down at the interloper in their midst. She was a fraud, an imposter, a baronet's daughter playing dress-up in a duchess's life. And somewhere in this vast, beautiful prison, she would have to find a way to survive. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through unfamiliar curtains, illuminating a bedroom larger than any Serene had ever slept in. She lay for long moments, simply staring at the ceiling, which was painted with cherubs and clouds, a miniature heaven looking down on her earthly confusion. The bed itself was a fortress of carved mahogany and silk hangings, so vast she'd felt like a child lost in its depths. She'd barely slept, lying awake in the darkness listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home. The settling of ancient timbers, the distant chime of a grandfather clock marking the long hours. The absolute, crushing silence of wealth that had never known want. A maid named Dorcas had been assigned to her, a quiet girl with nimble fingers and a gentle manner, who helped her dress in a morning gown of pale blue muslin. Someone had unpacked her trousseau during the night, arranging her modest belongings in a wardrobe large enough to hold the entire contents of her former bedroom. Her few dresses looked shabby against the vast emptiness, like poor relations come to visit and knowing they didn't belong. "The Dowager Duchess requests your presence in the East sitting room," Dorcas said, as she finished pinning Serene's hair into a simple but elegant arrangement. "At your earliest convenience," she said, "though I'm told Her Grace's requests are best treated as commands." The words were polite. The implication was clear. Serene had been summoned to face judgment. Lady Lavinia Ashworth, the Dowager Duchess, had not attended the wedding. Illness, the family had claimed publicly, but Seren had seen the truth in Cozima's nervous glances throughout the ceremony, in Corvin's granite expression whenever his mother was mentioned. The Dowager had not attended because she had not approved of the match. Any match. Either brother. Seren specifically. And now Seren would face her verdict alone. The East sitting room was a study in intimidation dressed as elegance. Blue silk wallpaper the color of winter twilight. Delicate French furniture that looked like it might shatter if touched by common hands. Porcelain figurines arranged on tables with military precision. Fresh flowers that must have cost a fortune this late in the season, their scent cloying in the closed room. And in the center of it all, arranged on a settee like a queen on her throne, sat Lady Lavinia. She was beautiful in the way of winter itself, all sharp edges and cold grandeur. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, not a strand out of place. Her black mourning dress was immaculate, despite it being nearly 3 years since her husband's death, as though she clung to grief as a form of armor. But it was her eyes that stopped Seren cold in the doorway. The same dark intensity as Corvin's, but without any of the warmth she sometimes glimpsed in his unguarded moments. These eyes held no warmth at all, only assessment. "So," the dowager's voice was cool and precise as a blade. "You're the girl who married my son." Seren curtsied, grateful that her knees held steady despite the trembling in her core. "Your Grace, thank you for receiving me. Did I have a choice?" Lady Lavinia gestured to a chair opposite her, not an invitation, a command. "Sit. We have much to discuss and little time for pleasantries." Seren sat, folding her hands in her lap to hide their unsteadiness. "You were supposed to marry Aldrich." The dowager's eyes raked over her, cataloging every detail of her appearance with the thoroughness of a merchant appraising goods. "That was the arrangement. The contract signed by your father and my late husband specified Aldrich quite clearly. There were terms, conditions, expectations. I'm aware, Your Grace. And yet here you are, married to Corvin instead, wearing the title of Duchess when you were contracted to be merely the wife of a second son." The dowager's lips curved, but the expression held no warmth. "Tell me, Miss Wyndham, how did you manage such an impressive feat of social climbing?" The accusation struck like a physical blow. Seren felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her voice level through sheer force of will. "I managed nothing, Your Grace. I was as surprised as anyone when Corvin appeared at the altar. The decision was his, not mine." "Corvin." The dowager's lips thinned. "You use his Christian name already. How intimate, how familiar. One might almost think you'd been practicing it. He requested I do so. We are married." "Married?" Lady Lavinia pronounced the word like something bitter on her tongue. "Because my eldest son is a coward who fled rather than honor his commitments. Because my youngest son is a fool who believes he can solve every problem by sacrificing himself. And because you, Miss Wyndham, were desperate enough to accept any Ashworth brother who would have you." The cruelty of it stole Seren's breath for a moment, but beneath the cruelty, she heard something else. Pain, the raw, ragged edges of a mother watching her family fracture along lines she couldn't control. "I did not scheme for this, Your Grace." Seren kept her voice steady, drawing on reserves of composure she hadn't known she possessed. "I accepted Aldrich's proposal because my family needed the alliance. When he failed to appear, when Corvin offered to take his place, I made the choice that protected my family from ruin. You may call that desperation if you wish. I call it duty." A flicker of surprise crossed the dowager's features. "Duty. You speak of duty while knowing nothing of what it truly costs. I have spent 40 years serving this family. I watched my husband build an empire of land and influence and carefully cultivated alliances. I watched him die before his time, leaving his sons to tear at each other like wolves fighting over carrion. Aldrich with his gambling and his reckless schemes. Corvin with his stubborn idealism and his refusal to accept the world as it truly is." She leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Where is Aldrich?" Seren asked the question that had haunted her since the cathedral. What did his letter say? Why would he flee his own wedding? The dowager's composure wavered, just for an instant. Her hands gripped the arms of her settee, knuckles whitening against the carved wood. "He is gone. To the continent, presumably, though he didn't trouble himself with specifics. Vienna, perhaps. Or Paris. Wherever debts can be ignored and responsibilities forgotten." Her voice hardened. "He left obligations we're still untangling and scandals we're still suppressing. He left because he is weak and selfish and utterly incapable of honoring any commitment that requires sacrifice. And Corvin took his place because..." Because Corvin has spent his entire life cleaning up his brother's messes. The words came out edged with something between anger and anguish. Because he believes duty means destroying yourself for others. Because he carries a weight of responsibility that should never have been his to bear. She stopped abruptly, pressing her lips together, as though she'd revealed more than she intended. Seren waited in the heavy silence. You want to know why he did it. The dowager's voice had changed, grown quieter, more dangerous. You think there's some noble explanation, some romantic reason the Duke of Ashworth would sacrifice his freedom for a girl so far beneath his station. I think, Serene said carefully, each word measured, that I would like to understand the man I've married, whatever his reasons. Then understand this. Lady Lavinia rose from her settee with the grace of someone who had commanded rooms for decades, her black skirts settling around her like shadows. My son is not a hero. He is a man burdened by responsibility he never wanted, haunted by a brother who has betrayed him repeatedly, and convinced that love is a weakness he cannot afford. He watched his father die suddenly, with no warning, and has spent 2 years trying to fill shoes that were never meant for him. She moved toward the window, her silhouette sharp against the morning light. You remind me of his grandmother, you know. The words came unexpectedly, almost softly. Corvin's father's mother. She came from nothing, a merchant's daughter, who somehow caught a duke's eye. Everyone said she would fail, that she didn't belong, that the ton would devour her. Instead, she became the most formidable duchess this family has ever known. Serene held her breath, uncertain whether this was praise or warning. She was also stubborn, proud, and utterly incapable of knowing her place. The dowager turned, her eyes sharp. It was her greatest strength and her greatest weakness. She loved fiercely and completely, and when she died, she left devastation in her wake. My husband's father never recovered from losing her. The implication was clear. Love was dangerous. Attachment was weakness. The dowager had learned those lessons well. Whatever his reasons for marrying you, do not mistake them for affection. Corvin does not allow himself affection. He allows himself duty, obligation, and the cold satisfaction of having done what was necessary. If you expect more, you will be disappointed. If you try to demand more, you will be destroyed. The threat was clear, but so was something else. Beneath the ice, beneath the cruelty, Seren heard the desperate love of a mother who had watched one son run and feared the other might break. I expect nothing, Seren said quietly. But I understand disappointment, Your Grace. My entire life has been a lesson in wanting things I cannot have. I assure you, I am quite practiced at survival. The dowager studied her with those piercing dark eyes that missed nothing. We shall see. She moved toward the door, her bearing regal despite the heaviness in her voice. Dinner is at 8. Do not be late. And do try to look like you belong. The staff gossip terribly, and I won't have them thinking my son married beneath him. She paused at the threshold, one hand on the doorframe. One more thing. If you hurt him, if you manipulate him, or try to exploit his sense of duty, I will destroy you. I don't care how sympathetic your circumstances are. Do we understand each other? Perfectly, Your Grace. The dowager swept from the room, leaving Serene alone with her racing heart and the unsettling realization that she had passed some sort of test. But she had also been given a warning, and somewhere in this vast manor, her husband was avoiding her, carrying secrets she was beginning to suspect had nothing to do with duty at all. The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind of instruction and expectation. Mrs. Blackstone appeared each morning with lists written in her precise, cramped hand, menus to approve, staff concerns to address. correspondence to review and respond to, tenant matters that required attention. Seren learned the names of 47 servants, memorized cooks' preferences regarding market days and which vendors she favored, and navigated the ancient feud between the head gardener and the stablemaster that required diplomatic intervention. The roses along the south wall belong to Mr. Henshaw's domain, Mrs. Blackstone explained with the gravity of a general discussing battle lines. But Mr. Carberry insists horses need shade, and those roses block the afternoon sun from the paddock. They've been fighting about it since 1803. Since 1803. Mr. Carberry's father and Mr. Henshaw's father started it. The sons continue out of tradition. Seren began to understand that managing a great house was less about household tasks and more about managing personalities, traditions, and territorial disputes that stretched back generations. She practiced walking in the formal gardens, learning to move with the measured grace expected of a duchess. She studied the family genealogy until she could recite 3 generations of Ashworths without hesitation. She memorized the seating arrangements for formal dinners and the proper forms of address for every rank of nobility. Cosima appointed herself Seren's guide to society, arriving at her chambers each afternoon with fashion plates and guest lists and endless commentary on who mattered, who merely thought they did, and who must be avoided at all costs. Lady Pemberton is a viper with excellent taste in wine, Cosima explained, spreading cards across Serene's writing desk like a general planning a campaign. Her husband controls half the votes in the county, so we must be civil even when she says cutting things about your gown. The Thornbury sisters are harmless gossips. Lord Ashford will try to corner you about hunting rights and bore you senseless. And Lady Isolde Vance. Cosima paused, her expression clouding. Who is Lady Isolde Vance? No one. Cosima gathered the cards with sudden briskness. Forget I mentioned her. She's been abroad for years. Probably won't even return. But the hesitation told Seren everything. There was someone who mattered, someone connected to Corvin's past, someone Cosima didn't want to discuss. She filed the name away for later. Corvin himself remained a ghost in his own house. Seren caught glimpses of him throughout her days, crossing the entrance hall with papers in hand, his brow furrowed in concentration. Riding out at dawn before the household stirred, his figure disappearing into the morning mist. Dining in his study, rather than the formal dining room where she ate alone beneath the painted gaze of his ancestors. He was avoiding her. The realization stung more than it should have. He's always like this when he's troubled, Cosima said gently one evening, catching Seren watching the empty doorway where Corvin had just disappeared. He retreats into work, buries himself in estate business. It's not about you specifically. But Seren wasn't certain that was true. The midsummer ball at Hartwell House would be her first public appearance as Duchess. The invitations had gone out weeks before the wedding chaos, addressed to the Duke and his intended bride. Now they would serve as Serene's formal introduction to society as the Duchess of Ashworth. The ton would be watching, judging, waiting for her to stumble and prove she didn't belong. You'll need armor, Cosima declared, summoning the modiste from the village for emergency fittings. The most beautiful gown anyone has ever seen. Let them whisper about your dress instead of your origins. The gown that emerged after 3 days of frantic work was a deep midnight blue, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like scattered stars. The bodice was cut elegantly but modestly, and the skirts fell in graceful folds that swirled when she walked. It was the most exquisite thing Seren had ever worn. She only hoped it would be enough. Hartwell House blazed with light, every window glowing against the summer darkness like a fallen constellation pulled down to earth. Carriages lined the drive in an endless procession, disgorging lords and ladies in silks and jewels, their laughter floating on the warm night air. Chinese lanterns hung from trees, casting colored shadows across manicured lawns. The scent of roses and night-blooming jasmine mingled with expensive perfume. Serene's stomach churned as their carriage rolled to a stop. Corvin sat across from her, resplendent in dark evening clothes that made his features look sharper, more aristocratic. The candlelight from the carriage lanterns carved his face into planes of shadow and gold. He had barely glanced at her when she'd descended the stairs at Ashworth Manor, though Cosima had gasped and declared her magnificent. "Remember," Cosima whispered from beside her, squeezing her hand. "You are the Duchess of Ashworth. They should be nervous about impressing you, not the reverse. You outrank nearly everyone in that ballroom." Easy words. Harder to believe when facing a ballroom full of people who had known the Ashworths for generations and viewed her as an interloper at best, a fortune hunter at worst. The footman opened the carriage door with a flourish. Corvin stepped out first into the golden light spilling from Hartwell House, then turned to offer his hand. Their eyes met. His gaze traveled over her slowly, taking in the midnight gown, the way the silver embroidery caught the light. For just a moment, his careful neutrality slipped, revealing something that made her breath catch. "You look—" He stopped, his throat working. "The gown suits you well." It wasn't quite a compliment. It wasn't quite not a compliment. Serene took his hand and descended into the lion's den. The ballroom was overwhelming in its magnificence. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured rainbows across a sea of silk and satin. An orchestra played from a gallery above, the music swelling and falling like the tide. Everywhere she looked, jewels glittered, and fans fluttered, and eyes tracked their arrival with avid interest. Whispers erupted in their wake like grass fire. "That's her. The one who married the wrong brother. I heard she trapped him somehow, compromised him at the altar." Imagine the audacity, a baronet's daughter as duchess. "I heard the first brother fled the country rather than marry her. What does that tell you?" Serene kept her chin high and her expression serene, drawing on every lesson her mother had ever taught her about dignity in the face of contempt. She had survived worse than whispers. She had survived her father's creditors pounding at the door. She had survived selling her mother's jewelry to pay for bread. She had survived watching everything she'd known crumble to dust. She could survive this. Their hosts, Lord and Lady Hartwell, greeted them with the practiced warmth of people who collected dukes like trophies. "Your Grace, what an honor to have you." Lady Hartwell's smile showed too many teeth. "And this must be the new Duchess. How delightful. We've heard so much about you." "All of it fascinating, I'm sure," Serene replied smoothly, surprising herself with her own composure. "Though I find reality rarely lives up to gossip. It lacks the creative flair." Lady Hartwell's smile froze momentarily. Beside her, Serene felt Corvin stiffen, but whether from disapproval or suppressed amusement, she couldn't tell. They moved into the ballroom proper, Corvin's hand at the small of her back, a proper touch, correct in every way, utterly impersonal. Then a voice cut through the crowd like a poisoned blade. "Corvin, what a surprise to see you here." The woman who approached was stunning in a way that made other women look faded. Chestnut hair arranged in elaborate curls that must have taken hours, a gown of crimson silk that clung to her figure with deliberate provocation, cut lower than fashion strictly allowed. Eyes the color of honey, warm and sweet on the surface, fixed on Corvin with possessive intensity. Lady Isolde Vance. It had to be. "Isolde." Corvin's voice dropped several degrees. "I didn't realize you'd returned from the continent." "Last month. I would have called at Ashworth Manor, but I heard you'd been rather busy." Her gaze slid to Serene, assessing every detail with predatory interest. Getting married, apparently. How unexpected. And to such an interesting choice. May I present my wife, Serene, Duchess of Ashworth. Corvin's hand pressed more firmly against Serene's back. A warning or support, she couldn't tell. Serene, this is Lady Isolde Vance, an old acquaintance. Acquaintance? Isolde laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. Is that what we're calling it now? How very proper of you, Corvin. How very much like you to rewrite history so neatly. The implication was unmistakable. Serene felt her face heat, but refused to look away or show weakness. A pleasure to meet you, Lady Isolde. Her voice emerged, steady, pleasant. I've heard almost nothing about you. I'm sure that's merely an oversight. Isolde's smile sharpened to a razor's edge. I'm sure it is. Corvin was always so private about the things that truly mattered to him, the things he wanted to protect, or perhaps hide. The barb found its mark, but Serene didn't flinch. Then we have something in common. I find privacy quite underrated in this society. So few people have anything worth keeping private. For a moment, Isolde's composure wavered. Surprise registered in her features, followed by something that might have been respect, or fury, or both. How refreshing! A duchess with claws beneath the silk. She turned back to Corvin, her expression softening to something almost tender. Save me a dance later, won't you? For old time's sake, I'm sure your wife won't mind. After all, she's so understanding about things. She disappeared into the crowd before he could respond, leaving her perfume hanging in the air like a threat. Serene released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide the evidence. I apologize. Corvin's voice was low, meant only for her. I should have warned you about her before tonight. Yes, you should have. She met his eyes directly, refusing to let him see how unsettled she was. Who is she to you? And don't tell me she's just an acquaintance. I may be new to society, but I'm not blind. The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them was ready to address. Someone from my past, his jaw set firmly. Nothing more than that now. It was clearly not the entire truth, but before Serene could press further, the orchestra struck up the opening notes of a waltz, and Corvin turned to face her fully. Dance with me. It wasn't a request. She placed her hand in his, and he led her onto the polished floor. The waltz began, and suddenly there was nothing but Corvin, his hand firm and warm at her waist, his shoulder solid beneath her palm, his eyes dark as midnight, fixed on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch and her heart stammer. You're doing well, he said quietly as they turned through the figures. Better than I expected. Better than most would manage. Did you expect me to fail? I expected you to be terrified. Most people would be, facing this gauntlet. I am terrified. She held his gaze as he guided her through a turn. But I learned long ago that fear and courage aren't opposites. You can be both at once. You can be shaking inside and still keep moving forward. His expression shifted. The careful neutrality gave way, just slightly, revealing something raw and real beneath the surface. You surprise me, Serene, continually. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. But his hand pressed more firmly at her waist, drawing her fractionally closer than propriety strictly allowed. I'm beginning to think I've underestimated you badly. They danced in silence after that, but something had changed between them. The distance felt less deliberate now, more like a barrier he was testing rather than defending. When the waltz ended, he didn't release her immediately. They stood there, hands still joined, while the ballroom swirled around them in a blur of color and sound. Isolde will try to hurt you, he said finally. She's skilled at finding vulnerabilities and exploiting them ruthlessly. You need to be prepared for whatever she might attempt. Then don't give her vulnerabilities to exploit. His eyes darkened. What does that mean? It means tell me the truth. About her. About Aldrich. About why you really married me. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. I'm not asking for affection, Corvin. I'm asking for honesty. I can't fight battles when I don't know what war I'm in. I can't protect myself from enemies I can't see. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. Tomorrow. Come to the library after breakfast. I'll tell you what you need to know. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. The library at Ashworth Manor was a cathedral of knowledge. Shelves stretched from floor to vaulted ceiling, laden with leather-bound volumes that smelled of age and wisdom and accumulated generations. Morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden beams like tiny stars. Corvin was already there when Seren arrived, standing before the empty fireplace with a glass of something amber in his hand. It was far too early for drinking. That alone told her this conversation would not be easy. Close the door, he said without turning. She did, then moved to sit in one of the leather chairs near the hearth. The leather was soft with age, molded by countless hours of use. She wondered how many difficult conversations these chairs had witnessed, how many Ashworth secrets they had absorbed. Corvin remained standing, his back to her, his shoulders rigid beneath his coat. Aldrich and I were never close. He spoke to the mantelpiece rather than to her, his voice flat and controlled. Even as children, there was a gulf between us. He was the heir, the important one, the son our father pinned all his hopes upon. I was the spare, useful only if something happened to Aldrich. That's not uncommon among brothers, entitled families. No, but most brothers don't actively try to destroy each other. He turned finally, and his expression was haunted, shadowed by memories he clearly wished he could forget. When our father died suddenly 2 years ago, the doctors discovered a flaw in his heart. He collapsed in this very room, at that desk. I was in London when it happened. By the time I arrived home, he was gone. I'm sorry. The title came to me because I was the second son, and father had never expected to die so young. There was no time to prepare, no transition. One day, I was living my own life, pursuing my own interests. The next, I was Duke, with an estate to manage and a family legacy to protect, and a brother who hated me for inheriting what he'd always assumed would be his. But Aldrich was the elder son. How? Our father changed the succession years ago, when Aldrich's tendencies became clear. Corvin's expression hardened. Gambling, reckless behavior, compromising situations with women who were not suitable. Father couldn't risk the estate falling into Aldrich's hands, so he petitioned for a special remainder, and the title passed to me instead. The pieces began falling into place. Aldrich's resentment became something darker after father died. He started gambling more heavily, drinking, accumulating debts I was constantly covering to prevent scandal. He would find women, seduce them with promises he never intended to keep, leave them ruined, and I would pay to keep their families quiet. Corvin's voice grew bitter. I became very efficient at cleaning up his messes. And Lady Isolde? Corvin moved to the window, staring out at the gardens below. The morning light was harsh on his face, revealing lines of tension and exhaustion she hadn't noticed before. Isolde was different. His voice hardened. We had an understanding years ago, before my father died, before any of this. Not love. I never promised her love, but an arrangement that suited us both. She wanted a title and position. I wanted someone who wouldn't demand emotions I couldn't give. What happened? Aldrich happened. The words emerged like they'd been torn from him. He pursued her deliberately, knowing she was connected to me. He seduced her with grand gestures and false promises, convinced her he could give her more than I ever would. Then he abandoned her when a wealthier prospect appeared. And she blamed you for not stopping him, for not warning her, for not being the kind of man who would fight for her. He turned to face Seren. Perhaps she was right to blame me. I knew what Aldrich was capable of. I should have protected her from him. Seren absorbed this, fitting the pieces together into a picture she didn't entirely like. She still wants you. I could see it in her eyes. She wants the title she was denied, the position, the revenge. His gaze met hers steadily. She'll try to use you to hurt me, Seren. She'll dig into your family's history, your father's debts, anything she can find. You need to be prepared for whatever weapons she decides to wield. I am prepared. Seren rose from her chair, moving toward him. I've spent my entire life being judged for circumstances beyond my control. Lady Isolde doesn't frighten me. She should. Perhaps. But so should you. And yet here I am. Something stirred in his eyes, that barrier he maintained, wavering almost imperceptibly. Why did you say yes? The question seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. At the altar. You could have refused, walked away, let the scandal fall on us rather than binding yourself to a stranger. Seren considered the question carefully. The honest answer was complicated. Layers upon layers of motivation, some practical, some desperate, some she wasn't ready to examine too closely. Because when you appeared at that altar, I wasn't as surprised as I should have been. She held his gaze, refusing to look away from the intensity she found there. Some part of me had always wondered what it would be like, to be yours instead of his. The confession hung between them, raw and dangerous. Corvin's breath caught visibly. Seren, I'm not asking for anything. She stepped back, creating distance before she could do something foolish. I know the terms of our arrangement. I know you can't. She shook her head, unable to finish the sentence. I just wanted you to know that I didn't say yes only because I had no choice. I said yes because some choices feel inevitable, even when they shouldn't. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything they weren't saying. Then Corvin moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and withdrew a small velvet box. This belonged to my grandmother. He held it out to her like an offering. My father's mother. The Ashworth emeralds. Every duchess has worn them since she received them as a wedding gift. Seren opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside lay a necklace of stunning emeralds, set in gold. The central stone, as large as her thumbnail, surrounded by diamonds that caught the light like frozen fire. Matching earrings nestled beside it on the velvet. I can't accept this. Her voice emerged as barely a whisper. It's too valuable. It belongs to your family. You are my family now. You're my wife. His voice softened unexpectedly. Whatever else this marriage is or isn't, you deserve to be acknowledged properly. Wear them to the Thornberry dinner next week. Let society see that the Duke of Ashworth stands behind his Duchess completely. She looked up at him, this complicated, wounded man who kept everyone at arm's length, yet had just handed her a piece of his family's history. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, then turned away, retreating behind his defenses. But Seren had seen behind them now. She had glimpsed the loneliness, the duty, the desperate wish to feel something beyond obligation. And she knew, with terrifying certainty that she was falling for him, which meant she was in far more danger than Lady Isolde could ever pose. The Thornbury dinner was meant to be a quieter affair than the Hartwell ball, an intimate gathering, a manageable introduction to the county's elite without the overwhelming crush of London society watching her every move. It became a disaster instead. The evening began promisingly enough. Seren wore the Ashworth emeralds, and the gasps that followed her entrance were gratifying. Lady Thornbury, a plump woman with kind eyes and a weakness for gossip, welcomed her warmly and complimented the jewels extensively. The dinner conversation flowed easily, and Corvin sat beside her, attentive in a way he hadn't been before, refilling her wine glass, leaning close to murmur explanations of the various family alliances at play. Something had changed between them since the library. The walls remained, but they felt less impenetrable now, more like boundaries he was testing rather than fortresses he was defending. After dinner, the party retired to the drawing room for music and conversation. Seren found herself near the terrace doors, momentarily alone, as Corvin discussed estate matters with Lord Thornbury, when Isolde materialized beside her like a beautiful, venomous apparition. "The emeralds suit you." Isolde's smile held all the warmth of a January frost. "Though I confess, I'm surprised he gave them to you so quickly. He must be quite desperate to legitimize this farce of a marriage. Or perhaps he simply recognizes his wife's rightful position." Seren kept her voice pleasant, despite the anger coiling in her stomach. "I understand that concept might be foreign to you, given your history with the family." Isolde's expression flickered with something sharp. "You think you know our history? You know nothing, little Duchess. You're a placeholder, a convenient solution to an inconvenient problem. The moment Aldrich returns, Aldrich abandoned his responsibilities and fled to the continent. I hardly think his return would change anything." "Wouldn't it?" Isolde leaned closer, her perfume cloying in the warm room. "Aldrich was the one your father's contract specified. If he returns and contests the marriage, claims it was performed under duress or fraud, the entire arrangement could be invalidated. You'd be nothing again. Less than nothing. Back to counting pennies and selling your mother's jewelry." The words hit like stones. Seren's composure wavered, just slightly. "That's not possible." "Isn't it? I've been corresponding with Aldrich for weeks. He's in Vienna, quite comfortable, but growing bored with exile. And he's very interested in the chaos his return might cause." Isolde straightened, her smile triumphant. "Enjoy your emeralds while you can, Duchess. Your reign may be shorter than you think." She swept away, leaving Seren frozen by the terrace doors. It couldn't be true. The marriage was legal, witnessed by hundreds, blessed by the church. But contracts and legal challenges and contested inheritances. The Tun had seen stranger things overturned, marriages annulled, duchesses reduced to nothing. She needed air. Seren slipped through the terrace doors into the cool night garden. Lanterns lined the pathways, casting pools of golden light between stretches of velvet shadow. She walked without direction, her mind racing, until she found herself in a secluded alcove, surrounded by climbing roses, heavy with summer blooms. "Seren." Corvin's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him emerging from the shadows, concern etched across his features. "I saw you leave. What did Isolde say to you?" "Nothing of consequence." "Don't lie to me. Not now." He moved closer, and she could see the tension in every line of his body. "You're trembling." She was. She hadn't noticed until he said it. "She claims Aldrich might return, that he could contest our marriage, that I could lose everything." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Is it true? Could he actually do that?" Corvin's expression turned thunderous. "Aldrich can try whatever he likes. It won't succeed." "But you don't know that for certain. The original contract specified him, not you. If he argues the substitution was invalid, If he claims you coerced me, then I'll fight it. With every resource I have, with every solicitor in England if necessary. His hands gripped her shoulders, steadying her. Listen to me. I don't care what contracts say or what Aldrich threatens. You are my wife. That is not going to change. Because of duty? Because you feel obligated to protect me from a mess your family created? Because— He stopped, his jaw working. Something raw broke through the careful control he always maintained. Because I cannot imagine this house without you in it anymore. Because I spend every meal wishing you would look at me the way you did at Hartwell, like I was something more than a title and a burden. Because He broke off, breathing hard. Seren stared at him. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. The moonlight caught his features, softening the harsh lines, making him look younger, more vulnerable. Because you what? The question hung between them in the rose-scented air. Corvin's grip on her shoulders intensified. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, asking permission for something he couldn't put into words. She answered by rising onto her toes and pressing her mouth to his. The kiss was nothing like she'd imagined during all those months of trying not to imagine it. It was better. Worse. Devastating. His lips were warm, insistent, tasting of wine and wanting. His hand slid from her shoulders to her waist, pulling her closer until she could feel the rapid beat of his heart against her own chest. She had dreamed of this. Through all those months of her engagement to his brother, through all those weeks of careful distance in their own marriage, she had dreamed of exactly this. And the reality was shattering, because now she knew what she would lose when it ended. They broke apart, breathless. Seren, Corvin's voice was rough. I need you to understand. This isn't part of any arrangement. This isn't duty or obligation. This is your grace. The cold voice cut through the night like a blade. They sprang apart to find the dowager standing at the entrance to the alcove, her face a mask of barely contained fury. Behind her, visible through the rose-covered archway, several dinner guests watched with avid interest. Mother. Corvin stepped forward, positioning himself between Seren and the gathering audience. This is exactly what it appears to be. Lady Lavinia's voice could have frozen the roses on their stems. A public spectacle. How gratifying to know my son has learned nothing from his brother's mistakes. That's unfair. Unfair? The dowager's composure broke, revealing the fear beneath. I have just received word that Aldrich is returning to England. He arrives within the fortnight, and he has made clear his intention to challenge this marriage as fraudulent and coerced. And instead of preparing our defense, instead of maintaining the appearance of propriety that might protect us in court, I find you compromising yourself in a garden with a woman half the county already considers an opportunist. The words landed like physical blows. Seren felt each one. I should go, she whispered. Yes. The dowager's eyes were chips of ice. You should. Seren fled. She didn't remember the journey back to Ashworth Manor. The carriage ride passed in a blur of tears she refused to shed. Dorcas helped her undress in silence, asking no questions, offering no comfort beyond gentle hands. By morning, Seren had made her decision. She found Mrs. Blackstone before breakfast and requested a carriage to her family's home. She wrote a letter to Cosima, thanking her for her kindness and friendship. She wrote a letter to the dowager, formal and brief, acknowledging that her presence was creating difficulties the family could not afford. She did not write to Corvin. She couldn't find the words for what needed to be said. The carriage was ready by noon. Seren climbed inside with a single trunk of her original belongings, leaving behind the beautiful gowns and borrowed jewels and the life that had never truly been hers. She left the emeralds in their velvet box on her dressing table, unable to take what she hadn't earned. She did not look back as the carriage rolled away from Ashworth Manor. If she had, she might have seen Corvin standing at his study window, his face a mask of devastation, watching her leave and making no move to stop her. Home was smaller than she remembered. The parlor where she'd once taken tea with her mother now felt cramped, its faded wallpaper and worn carpet painfully visible after weeks of silk and marble. The ceiling seemed too low. The windows let in too little light. Her bedroom, which she'd shared with Marin until her engagement, seemed to have shrunk in her absence. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, and nothing felt the same. She didn't fit here anymore, but she didn't belong at Ashworth Manor either. She existed in some terrible middle ground, belonging nowhere. Her mother wept when she arrived, assuming the worst. Her father retreated to his study, unable to meet her eyes. Only Marin asked the questions everyone else avoided. "Did he hurt you? The Duke?" "No." Seren stared out the window at their modest garden, seeing instead the vast grounds of Ashworth Manor, the fountains, the peacocks, the library filled with books she would never finish reading. He was kind. Kinder than I deserved, perhaps. "Then why did you leave?" "Because I love him. Because loving him made me vulnerable. Because his mother was right. I don't belong in his world, and staying would only destroy us both." But she couldn't say any of that to her 15-year-old sister. "It's complicated," she said instead. "Sometimes the right thing and the easy thing aren't the same." The days passed slowly, each one identical to the last. Seren helped her mother with household tasks she'd once found tedious and now clung to as distraction. She read to her father in the evenings, choosing books that wouldn't remind her of Ashworth's library. She tried to remember what her life had been before Corvin, before emeralds and ballrooms and kisses in moonlit gardens. She couldn't. Everything felt hollow. The books she'd once loved held no interest. The food she ate had no taste. She went through the motions of living while feeling like a ghost, haunting her own existence. At night, she dreamed of him. His hands at her waist during the waltz, his lips on hers in the rose garden. His voice, rough with emotion, saying words she'd never let him finish. She woke each morning with tears on her pillow and an ache in her chest that nothing could ease. "You're miserable," her mother observed one afternoon, finding Seren staring blankly at embroidery she hadn't touched in an hour. "And I don't think it's because you miss the luxury." "I'm fine. You're lying, and you've never been good at it." Her mother sat beside her, taking her hands. "I've watched you these past days, darling. You're not mourning a position. You're mourning a person." Serene's throat constricted. "It doesn't matter what I'm mourning. It's over." "Is it?" Her mother's eyes were gentle but probing. "Did he send you away?" "No. I left." "Why?" "Because his family is facing a legal challenge. Because his brother is returning to contest our marriage. Because his mother made clear that my presence was making everything worse." The words tumbled out like water through a broken dam. "Because I'm a liability, Mother. A complication. He deserves someone who strengthens his position, not someone who threatens it." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "When your father lost everything," she said finally, "I had a choice. I could have left, gone back to my family, who had warned me against marrying a man they considered beneath me. Instead, I stayed. Not because it was easy or sensible, but because I loved him. Because facing hardship together felt less terrifying than facing comfort alone. This is different." "Is it?" Her mother squeezed her hands. "You love this Duke. I can see it in your eyes every time you refuse to speak his name. And from what you've told me, from what you haven't told me, I suspect he loves you too. Love isn't enough, not against legal challenges and family opposition, and love is never enough on its own." Her mother's voice was firm. But it's the foundation everything else builds on. Without it, all the legal victories and social acceptance in the world are meaningless. She rose, pressing a kiss to Serene's forehead. The question isn't whether you can survive without him. You're a Wyndham. You can survive anything. The question is whether survival is the same as living. She left Serene alone with her thoughts, and the terrible, dawning realization that running hadn't made her safe. It had only made her lonely. The letter arrived on a gray morning 3 days later, not from Corvin, from Cosima. Serene's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Dearest Serene, I am writing against my mother's explicit instructions, so please know that receiving this letter means I have committed what she would consider a grave act of rebellion. I trust you appreciate the sacrifice. You must return. I know what happened at the Thornberry dinner. I know what my mother said to you. She was wrong. She was frightened and angry, and she took it out on you, which is unforgivable, but also entirely predictable. She has spent her entire life preparing for battles, and when one appears, she strikes at the nearest target. You simply had the misfortune of being closest. Aldrich has indeed returned. He arrived 2 days ago, full of bluster and threats, demanding money and making noise about contesting the marriage. Mother has been beside herself with worry. The solicitors are gathering evidence. But here is what matters. Corvin has refused to consider any settlement that would invalidate your marriage. Aldrich offered to withdraw his challenge in exchange for a substantial sum and an acknowledgement that Corvin coerced you into accepting him at the altar. Corvin threw him out of his study, literally threw him through the door. I've never seen him so angry. He loves you, Serene. He hasn't said it because he's Corvin, and saying things directly would apparently cause him physical pain. But he loves you. He's been haunting the house like a specter since you left. He takes his meals alone in the library, surrounded by the books he once shared with you. He rides out at dawn and returns at dusk, exhausted and silent. My mother has since reconsidered her position. I believe watching Corvin these past days has shown her that she made a terrible mistake in driving you away. She hasn't apologized. She's not capable of that yet. But she's stopped speaking against you. That's as close to an admission of fault as you're likely to get. Please come back. Not for the family or the legal battle or any practical reason. Come back because you belong here. Because we need you. Because he needs you, even if he'll never ask. The carriage that delivered this letter will wait for your response. Your devoted sister, in law and in spirit. Cosima Serene read the letter 3 times. Then she went to find her mother. I have to go back. Her mother smiled, unsurprised. I know. It might not work. Aldrich's challenge, the Dowager's opposition. There are so many obstacles still. There always are. Her mother pulled her into an embrace. But obstacles are meant to be overcome. And I suspect you're rather good at that. The carriage was indeed waiting, the Ashworth crest gleaming on the door. Serene packed quickly, taking only what she'd brought with her. The borrowed gowns, the emeralds, everything else remained at Ashworth Manor. Waiting. As the carriage pulled away from her family home, Serene watched her mother and Marin waving from the doorway. Her father stood behind them, his hand raised in farewell. She was going back. Not because she was certain of success, not because she had a plan. She was going back because Cosima was right. She belonged there, with Corvin. Whatever that meant, whatever it cost, she belonged there, and it was time to fight for it. Ashworth Manor rose against the evening sky, like a promise waiting to be kept. Serene's heart hammered against her ribs as the carriage rolled up the familiar drive. What if Cosima had exaggerated? What if Corvin's anger at Aldrich was about pride rather than love? What if she was making a fool of herself, returning uninvited to a house where she was no longer welcome? The doors opened before she could knock. Mrs. Blackstone stood in the entrance, her severe face softening into something almost like a smile. "Your Grace. Welcome home." Home. The word wrapped around Seren like a warm blanket. Is the Duke available?" "In the library, Your Grace. He's been there most hours since you left. I'll let him know. No, I'll go myself." She climbed the familiar stairs, walked the familiar corridors, until she stood before the library door. Her hand trembled as she raised it to knock. "Enter." His voice, beloved and weary. She opened the door. Corvin stood by the window, silhouetted against the fading light. He looked terrible, haggard, his hair disheveled, his cravat missing entirely, shadows carved beneath his eyes like bruises. A half-empty decanter sat on the desk, evidence of too many nights spent drinking alone in this room. He turned at the sound of her entrance, and his expression transformed. "Seren, Cosima wrote to me." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "She said you needed me. Cosima talks too much." But his voice was rough with emotion. "You shouldn't have come back. Aldrich is here. My mother is on the warpath. The situation is complicated, yes," I gathered. She moved closer, watching him track her progress across the room. "I also gathered that you refused his offer to withdraw the challenge. It would have required declaring our marriage invalid. I won't do that. Because of duty? Because of your pride? Because of you." The words tore out of him. "Because the thought of letting him erase what we have, of pretending it never mattered, is unbearable. Because I would rather fight every court in England than admit that marrying you was anything less than the best decision I've ever made." Serene's eyes burned with unshed tears. "You never said." I didn't know how. He crossed the remaining distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I've spent my entire life being told that love was a weakness, that wanting things, truly wanting them, only led to loss. When my father died, I watched everything I thought I knew crumble. I swore I would never give anyone that power over me. And now? And now I can barely breathe when you're not in the room." His forehead dropped to rest against hers. "I love you, Seren. Not because you're convenient or suitable or helpful to my position. I love you because you're brave and honest, and you make me want to be more than a title carrying out obligations. I love you because, when you're near, I finally feel like I'm living instead of just performing life." A sob escaped her. She hadn't meant to cry, but the tears came anyway, spilling down her cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've loved you since before I had any right to. Since I was engaged to your brother and trying desperately not to look at you across ballrooms." Corvin pulled back, his eyes searching hers. "Then stay. Fight this with me. Not as an arrangement or a convenience, but as partners. As equals." "What about your mother?" She made her feelings quite clear. "My mother," came a voice from the doorway, "has reconsidered her position." They turned to find the dowager standing at the entrance, Cosima hovering nervously behind her. Lady Lavinia's expression was difficult to read, but something in her bearing had shifted. She looked older, somehow, more tired, less certain. "I owe you an apology." The words seemed to cost her something. "I spoke cruelly and unfairly at the Thornbury dinner. I was frightened by Aldrich's threats, and I directed that fear at you." Seren stared, too shocked to respond. "I spent many years believing that protecting this family meant controlling every aspect of my sons' lives. I chose duty over happiness for myself and expected them to do the same." The dowager moved into the room, her gaze fixed on Corvin. "But watching you these past days, seeing what losing her has done to you, I've had to confront an uncomfortable truth. I was wrong about many things. Mother, Let me finish. Lady Lavinia raised a hand. I will support this marriage publicly and completely. I will help you fight Aldrich's challenge with every resource and connection at my disposal. And I will endeavor, difficult as it may be, to accept that my son has found something I never allowed myself to seek. Happiness. She turned to Seren, and her eyes softened almost imperceptibly. I said you reminded me of Corvin's grandmother. I meant it as a warning then. But perhaps it should have been praise. She loved fiercely and completely. And yes, losing her broke the man who loved her. But when I asked my father-in-law once if he regretted loving her, he said he would have endured twice the pain for half the joy. She reached out and took Seren's hand. Her grip was cool and firm. Make him happy. That's all I ask. Make him happy, and I will learn to be grateful for you. It wasn't quite warmth. It wasn't quite approval. But it was a beginning. I will, Seren said. I promise. The Dowager nodded once, released her hand, and swept from the room with Cosima in tow, leaving Seren and Corvin alone. Well, Corvin said after a long moment of silence. That was unexpected. Seren laughed, the sound watery but bright. Your family is exhausting. Our family, he corrected, pulling her close. You're stuck with us now. I can think of worse fates. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And this time, no one interrupted. Aldrich's challenge never reached the courts. The evidence Corvin's solicitors assembled was overwhelming. Witnesses who had seen Aldrich flee the cathedral. Letters proving he had planned his escape for weeks. Testimony from the man Aldrich had paid to handle his affairs in Vienna, who proved remarkably cooperative once he realized the Duke's resources outmatched any protection Aldrich could offer. Faced with public humiliation and potential criminal charges for fraud, Aldrich withdrew his claims. He accepted a modest allowance conditional on remaining abroad permanently, and departed for Venice within the fortnight, his threats evaporating like morning mist. But Seren insisted on one more thing, not a legal victory, a public one. The Ashworth Ball had been an annual tradition for 3 generations. This year, it would serve a different purpose. You want to do what? Corvin stared at her across the breakfast table. I want to announce our marriage properly. Not as a scandal or a substitution or a hasty arrangement to cover disaster. I want society to see us choose each other. They already know we're married. They know the circumstances. They don't know the truth. Seren met his gaze steadily. I don't want to spend the rest of our lives with people whispering that you married me out of obligation. I want them to see that it's real. So the invitations went out. All of society. Everyone who had gossiped and judged and waited for their marriage to crumble. The night of the ball, Seren descended the main staircase of Ashworth Manor in a gown of deep emerald silk that matched the jewels at her throat. The family emeralds, yes, but now accompanied by a new piece. A ring Corvin had commissioned, especially for her. An emerald, surrounded by diamonds, fitted for her hand alone. The ballroom glittered with candlelight and crystal. 300 guests watched as she entered on Corvin's arm. Nervous? He murmured. Terrified. Good. Then we match. They reached the center of the ballroom. The orchestra fell silent, every eye fixed upon them. Corvin turned to face the assembled crowd, his voice carrying across the vast room. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Many of you have heard the stories about how my wife and I came to be married. Some of those stories are even true. A ripple of nervous laughter. But there's one part of our story that no one knows, and I think it's time I shared it. He turned to Seren, taking her hands in his. I fell in love with this woman the moment she agreed to marry my brother. I watched her from across rooms and dreamed of conversations we would never have. I convinced myself that wanting her was a betrayal, that loving her was impossible, that the closest I would ever come to her was standing beside my brother at their wedding. The crowd had gone utterly silent. When Aldrich fled, I told myself I was stepping in out of duty, to protect her family, to spare her humiliation. I told myself it was noble and selfless and entirely unrelated to the feelings I'd been burying for months. He smiled, self-deprecating. I'm an excellent liar, even to myself. Serene's vision blurred with tears. But the truth is simpler and far less noble. I married her because I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else doing so. Because when she said yes at that altar, some part of me finally felt like the world had shifted into its proper alignment. Because I loved her then, desperately and hopelessly, and I love her now, completely and forever. He dropped to one knee. The crowd gasped. Serene Ashworth, Duchess of Ashworth, my wife-in-law, and in every way that matters. Will you do me the honor of remaining married to me? Not because of contracts or obligations or family expectations, but because I am utterly, irrevocably yours, and I cannot imagine facing another day without you beside me. The tears spilled over. Serene laughed through them, joy and disbelief and overwhelming love tangled together. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. 1,000 times yes. He rose and kissed her right there in the middle of the Ashworth ballroom, in front of 300 witnesses. It was scandalous and perfect and absolutely right. 1 year later, autumn had painted the grounds of Ashworth Manor in shades of gold and crimson. Serene stood at the library window, watching the leaves drift across the lawn like scattered jewels. Behind her, Corvin worked at his desk, the familiar scratch of his pen providing a steady rhythm that she had come to love. It was the sound of home, of belonging, of a life she had never imagined and could no longer imagine living without. "You're staring out the window again," he observed without looking up. "I'm thinking." "About what?" Serene turned, her hand resting on her belly, where a subtle swell had begun to show beneath her morning dress. "About how different everything is. 1 year ago, I was preparing to marry your brother and dreading every moment of it." Corvin set down his pen. His eyes dropped to her hand, and his expression softened with wonder. "And now?" "Now, I can't imagine wanting anything else." He rose and crossed to her, pulling her gently into his arms. His palm covered hers, where it rested on their growing child. "I found something yesterday," she said, "hidden in one of your father's books." "What book?" "The collected letters of Marcus Aurelius. It fell out when I was reshelving." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Yellowed with age, the creases worn soft from handling. Corvin took it, his brow furrowing as he recognized the handwriting. "My father's hand. Read it." He unfolded the letter carefully, as though it might crumble at his touch. His eyes moved across the page, and Serene watched emotions cross his face: surprise, pain, and finally, a kind of peace. When he finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "He wrote this for me, before he died. He must have known somehow." "What does it say?" Corvin cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. "My dear son, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you are carrying burdens I wish I could have spared you. Your mother's death taught me that love is a risk. Loving someone means giving them the power to break you. For years, I thought the lesson was to protect yourself, to keep your heart guarded and your emotions controlled. I was wrong. The lesson was that some things are worth breaking for. Your mother was worth every moment of grief that followed her loss. Loving her, being loved by her, those years were the only ones that truly mattered. Everything else was just filling time. Do not fill your time, my son. Do not perform life while forgetting to live it. Find someone who makes the risk worth taking. Love them with everything you have. And when the fear comes, as it will, remember that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to love anyway. Be brave, Corvin. Be happy. That is all I ever wanted for you. Your loving father. Silence fell between them, sacred and heavy. Seren reached up to touch his face, brushing away the tear that had escaped down his cheek. He would have been proud of you. You think so? I know so. She pulled him down for a kiss, soft and slow. You were brave. You chose love. You chose me. Best choice I ever made. His arms enclosed her more tightly. Though technically, you chose first, at the altar. Because you were standing there. Because some part of me knew, even then. Knew what? Seren smiled against his lips. That you were always the right brother. Outside, the autumn wind scattered more leaves across the lawn. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, and the library held them in its warm embrace. They had started as a scandal, an arrangement, a substitution at the altar. They had become something else entirely. Partners. Lovers. Family. And on the anniversary of their unconventional wedding, as had become their private tradition, they returned to the cathedral where it had all begun. They sat in the same pew where Seren had stood trembling in her wedding gown, and they remembered. The wrong brother. The desperate choice. The love that had been waiting all along. Any regrets? Corvin asked, his hand intertwined with hers. Seren looked at the altar where her life had changed forever. Where she had said yes to a man she barely knew and discovered he was everything she'd ever wanted. Not a single one. He kissed her hand. She leaned against his shoulder. And in the quiet of the empty cathedral, the Duke and Duchess of Ashworth gave thanks for scandals and substitutions and the beautiful chaos of love. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that defies expectations, in characters who choose courage over convention, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I am grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you would like more romance stories with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.